So I have been working with misinformation correction for a few years now. And when we talk about misinformation correction, we're essentially saying um, misinformation, so information that is embedded in false, inaccurate information. And then how can we correct that? Because one of the things that we know in the literature is that it's hard to correct misinformation. So my research looks at how we can alter individual beliefs and attitudes that are entrenched in misinformation, and how we can um, alter those specifically as it relates to the MMR vaccine. So I've been looking at misinformation correction specifically as it relates to the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine. So the common piece of misinformation that we hear regarding that vaccine is that it causes autism, which science has shown us again, time and time and again, that it doesn't. And so despite that, there's still a number of individuals who still hold those beliefs. So my research investigates, well, what are the beliefs that they hold and how malleable are those beliefs? So how can we correct them? The idea of vaccine hesitancy, it's nothing new. So it's essentially individuals who are hesitant to receive a vaccine, and that can happen for a number of reasons. But what we know historically about individuals kind of pushing back on mandated vaccines, we have seen this in the US as early as the late 1800s with the mandate of the smallpox vaccines. So a lot of individuals, when they started mandating smallpox vaccines, they actually said, well, we think this is a violation of our liberties, and we don't necessarily want to take this vaccine. And so actually the formation of that became the Anti-Vaccination Society of America. And so we saw it in the late 1800s. We saw it again roughly in the 1980s with the emergence of diphtheria, tetanus and pertussis, the DTP or DTaP vaccine. There were some individuals who said, well, wait, what are we putting in our bodies? Let's look into this a little more. And probably more recently with the MMR vaccine, so for measles, mumps, and rubella. And a lot of that is embedded in the misinformation. So the misinformation being that it leads to or causes autism. So the idea that individuals are hesitant to vaccines is nothing new, but we're probably seeing sort of what individuals have described as an uptick in this hesitancy. And that's just given the global pervasiveness of the pandemic and also how quickly individuals are trying to get these vaccines out and available. One of the things that I always discuss when I talk about misinformation is how it spreads. And the important thing to know about the difference between misinformation and disinformation is all about intent. So individuals can unknowingly spread misinformation. Maybe they overheard something, or maybe something was printed and then later retracted and updated. So we can unknowingly pass along false or inaccurate misinformation. And it's not necessarily something that's done intentionally, which is what separates misinformation from disinformation. So disinformation, a lot of us have probably heard this more frequently with the recent presidential election. You've probably heard this term disinformation, and that is an intentional misleading or an intentional promotion of false or inaccurate misinformation. So some potential reasons, as far as COVID, the first thing that we have to look at is individual perception of their risk of COVID. So some research has demonstrated that individuals who are more likely to suffer from severe COVID symptoms are more likely to say, yes, I will take a vaccine when it's offered to me. So there's a correlation between how at risk am I and whether or not I will elect to receive this vaccine. A lot of individuals, what you'll hear is that they want to wait until others have been vaccinated first. And a lot of this comes at this notion of the fear of the safety and efficacy of the vaccine. So a lot of individuals will cite the vaccine has been generated very quickly. We have seen this done at a rate that I don't think we've ever noted before. I think the quickest vaccine prior to that was actually for mumps, and that took several years before we had a vaccine for that. So some individuals are a bit worried about the speed and therefore the efficacy, the long-term effects of the vaccine.